What I'm going to do is recap an article I read recently about GraphQL versus REST. They outlined some advantages and some disadvantages thanks to these guys. I will include a link to the original article. I should give the ability to link inside this. Anyway, I don't necessarily agree with all of these, but the overview is pretty good. So let's jump into it. The first advantage they have here, I completely agree with. It allows customers, and customers I'm going to say are clients, either a browser web experience or a mobile app or even another server. A problem, and I agree with this with REST APIs, is the API designer at some point decides how many fields and what things get joined together. And what we see happen is often there's this initial like massive API, and then the client needs sort of maybe not as many fields, or they need to optimize it in some way. And the API designer starts having to create versions of the API. Oops, that was not what I wanted. And it just leads to a proliferation of different API endpoints and a lot of complexity to know which one to call, and just even managing the number of APIs I see start to happen gets to be a problem. To counteract that, what often folks do is they just say, well, we're not going to create any special versions then. You get the one big API that returns everything, then you run into overfetching, and there's a lot more data moving back and forth that really might not need to. So point number one, definitely a W for GraphQL. Performance. Uh, this is a little bit contentious because I just don't necessarily agree, right? I'm not going to make that a W. Uh, yes, uh, in the overfetching scenario, it's probably going to be faster. There are reasons why it might not be. So I don't necessarily agree with that. Um, the single endpoint and this just feels like a stretch to me. Flexibility, definitely a W. Uh, for the most part, GraphQL, when you introduce this sort of GraphQL layer here, uh, the client gets a lot more flexibility in how they fetch the data. They get to specify, in this query, I want two fields from the product and only the product. And when you send that out, GraphQL can say, oh, I only need product data. It comes from here. Here you go. If you have the big Swiss Army knife API, they don't get to specify that. It's going to get the product, get all the fields, get all the variants, package it all up, and send it back. So there are there is a lot more flexibility in allowing the client to specify what they need instead of trying to figure it out up front. This sort of reeks of big design up front because you have to get you have to predict how the client's going to want to use your APIs. The big W to me for GraphQL is you don't have to predict that so much. As a matter of fact, you can, oops, that was weird. You can sort of add things on the fly, and existing clients won't know, and they just start using the new fields when they're available. Versus, in this model, you can kind of do the same thing, but every time you add a new extension uh, or expansion, uh, you sort of get it, and that's fine. But now there's more data moving that someone might not want. Where in this case, I've added 5 new things you can get by extension and expansion through the product. If nobody's adding those to their query, they'll never see it, so they'll never get the data. They won't take the performance hit. On this case, they're going to get it whether they want it or not. Less effort to implement, only for the client. I this is not this is I don't call that a win. In general, GraphQL is going to be more effort to implement on the infrastructure side and in the back end. If you are just the client, yes, it's probably less effort. There are lots of libraries that make it really easy to use. Down to sort of the drawbacks. I don't understand this. I think the biggest endpoint bottleneck is that these all have unique paths and they're GET requests. So therefore, most of the infrastructure in the internet knows how to cache this. And you can set cache control headers so that it's cached at the edge. So the browser never goes back to your infrastructure. It could be pulling it from an edge server local to the browser, meaning in the same town or region. So that's going to be faster. So if that's what they're saying, then yes, that is a drawback. Um, I don't know if that's what they're saying. We'd have to ask them. But security, this is another, I think, not really a loss. The security is about the same. I think the only advantage REST has is that a lot of the infrastructure can secure things by path. Because this is all one path, you need to either inspect the query or do other things to secure it, the requests. I don't see that as a big loss. As a matter of fact, I'll put this over here and doesn't matter. Complexity. Yes, this is a big disadvantage, uh, which is funny because I thought at one point there was a simplicity in here, but uh, this is more complicated no matter what. They mentioned caching, uh, building this infrastructure and load balancing and failover and everything for the GraphQL endpoints, especially if they're caching things internally. Gets to be uh, like there's back end work that's going to have to happen and ops stuff that's going to have to happen. Cost also not in GraphQL's favor. Uh, this stuff back here costs more to maintain. This is commodity largely at this point. Uh, there's really not a comparison. GraphQL, if you're, and I want to just clarify one thing. Cost measured by the productivity of a front-end developer is going to go down with GraphQL. Cost measured by infrastructure and operations is in the back end is going to go up. Part of the calculus folks needs to do, and honestly, what I see happen is we either have front-end developers telling us how great it is, or we have back-end people saying, "Oh my gosh, look at all this infrastructure, caching's hard, all of this." In reality, you need to figure out where you're spending your time and money. If your time and money is spent with your clients waiting for new versions of APIs to get created because they have a special use case and there are performance problems or whatever else, like this cost here, which largely after initial implementation is going to be fixed, might be insignificant relative to the delay and other disadvantages here. So anyway, this is a quick recap. I think if I were to characterize this, there were two clear wins, a bunch of downsides, and sort of a red herring there. Uh, I'll leave it to you to decide if this is something that might work for you. Go ahead and comment on in particular, how are you using it? I don't know that 80%, I think they said 82% use REST. I think even folks using GraphQL are using REST. So I don't know. But I'd be curious if this holds true in the larger internet crew. All right. Well, thanks a lot.